In today's episode, not only do we have a special guest, but we've also got a wonderful co-host. So I'll start with the co-host. Scott Radford is a performance coach and a pilot for BA. He's also been a great friend of mine over the past nearly year and a half, and we are definitely going to be doing more episodes together. And then on the show today, as our first mutual guest, we have Dr. Shane Creado, who is a double board certified sleep medicine doctor and psychiatrist. He practices functional sleep medicine at Amen Clinics and integrative psychiatry and sports psychiatry. So today, Scott and I are coming at this from very different angles, me from specifically sleep and how parents can think about sleep when it comes to their children, and Scott from a performance angle. So without further ado, Scott, Dr. Shane, welcome. Shane, a big welcome to the podcast. So Scott and I are both super excited to be able to have this conversation for very different reasons. And so hopefully we're going to have a very in-depth and sort of varied conversation today. First question, I'm going to dive straight in with them. I want to know, so you are a psychiatrist and a sleep medicine physician. What exactly does that mean?
It means a lot of different things. So thank you so much for having me, both of you. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. I started off my health career in physical therapy, actually. So after high school, I did physical therapy, and I just enjoyed working with my patients, getting to know their stories, and also was disappointed as to why they weren't really incorporating the rehab strategies. And so I thought I need to know more and do more. And so I went into medicine with the goal of doing psychiatry and getting to know them on a deeper level, helping them with motivation and drive. And while in psychiatry training, I came across my sports psychiatry colleagues who were in the International Society for Sports Psychiatry. And I realized, hey, it's not just about normalizing mental health issues, it's really about optimizing, whether it's the general population or elite athletes. And so I got involved in sports psychiatry, and they nominated me to the board a year later, which was amazing. I had so many amazing mentors along the way. But in psychiatry and in sports psychiatry, I realized there were no formulae, there was no protocol for sleep. And that was shocking to me. Psychiatrists were simply expecting the sleep issues to resolve if the psychiatric issues resolved, which is never the case. The evidence shows that now. And in the elite sports world, while athletes are focusing on nutrition, physical training, mental conditioning coaching, they weren't really using personalized strategies to optimize sleep. At the bare minimum, they were normalizing or addressing sleep issues only when an athlete identified a very serious problem. And so my thought was, why aren't we addressing this in a meaningful way, in a structured way, in an evidence-based way? None of this was taught in medical school or psychiatry. And so I did additional training, a super specialty, if you will, what we call a fellowship here in the US, in sleep medicine. And then not just normalizing sleep, but optimizing sleep. I've realized there's such a great need. And so I wrote the sleep guidelines for the Australian Football League. We got involved with the US Olympic Committee, the NBA Players Association, the PGA Tour Europe. I've started a sleep performance committee for the International Society for Sports Psychiatry, where we're going to work on establishing guidelines for different sports organizations. I work with different teams on a team level, preseason, in-season, off-season, individual athletes as well, to identify sleep problems and then correct them, or identify those who don't have sleep problems but simply want to optimize. And we could definitely go into how those optimization strategies tangibly reflect boosts in performance and other biological metrics like testosterone levels. So it's been an amazing, amazing journey thus far. And there's so much more to do. I wrote the book Peak Sleep Performance for Athletes that we published a couple of years ago. And there's so much more work we're going to be working on. So there's a lot of work to be done. And when we talk about the amazing numbers we see already in the limited data thus far, you'll know that how much more benefit can be achieved with even more data-driven personalized strategies, especially now in the world of AI and machine learning.
People are starting to realize how important sleep is. But how much of an uphill battle did you find it initially? Number one. And number two, when you say that there was nothing taught at varsity about sleep, do you think that's changing?
So, yes, while there is a growing awareness, thanks to amazing people like you guys who are really spreading the word and making known that it's not something to shy away from, and it's not a badge of honor to say, I survive on 6 hours of sleep. As Matthew Walker said, right? He said, uh, th- down to a whole number, the number of people who have no adverse effects from getting 6 hours or less of sleep is zero. So there is a growing chorus, and that's only because I think, in my opinion, I think scare tactics really work to some degree when we find that sleep problems are a major direct risk factor, but also a modifiable risk factor for the 10 most common causes of death and disability in the world: heart attacks, strokes, diabetes, obesity, cancers, dementia, hypertension, road traffic accidents, mental health issues. We now know that sleep is directly implicated in each one of those. And so when we have this in the public domain, when we're growing a public awareness, even if doctors aren't aware or trained, the patient will say, well, I read this article about sleep problems. We know that dementia in the US costs our economy $360 billion a year. 15% of that is 54 billion a year in the US alone. So we can have savings. Talk about healthcare savings, talk about the cost of healthcare. So the education is going from the general population to the stakeholders who make the decisions. And while there's a growing chorus for improving sleep and tracking sleep, we know the wearable market is exploding, 54 billion a year in a couple of years. We also know that with all this data, it's very easy to say, well, wow, these are all my numbers. What do you do about it? We can be thirsting for wisdom while being flooded with information. So that's where we come in, right? Personalized sleep strategies, looking at all the variables that are involved and laying out a good plan for you. So checking your sleep, hoping to improve it, is as good as checking your weight every day, hoping to lose weight. It really doesn't work that way. So the awareness is growing, but in the sporting world, only a few athletes or certain decision makers like coaches and directors of performance are now becoming more aware of it. So the conversation is shifting, but there's a huge amount of work to be done. And I don't think it as an obstacle. I think about it as an opportunity. And that's exactly where I think we're in exciting times where we can combine the existing data, find gaps, dive in there, and then use AI and machine learning to truly change sleep forevermore. Because think about this, if we could have personalized sleep strategies for even 10% of the population, talk about what that would do in terms of reducing the disease burden for hypertension, diabetes, obesity, cholesterol issues, dementias, cancers, but also the cost reductions and the quality of life improvements. Because whether you're an elite athlete or trying to be the best mom that you can be, we're all trying to optimize in our own way.
It's interesting, actually. The one thing I thought from that when you were talking is that with all this data and this information that is now being made available to us, and wearing all the wearables and understanding, you talked about Matt Walker and his book. I think reading that book, certainly among the pilot community, it was super, super popular. But the one thing I noticed it was that it increased the level of anxiety in people trying to get to sleep, certainly in environments where you can't change some of those conditions. So for us, we certainly can't change when it is that we have to fly and when it is that we get to sleep. And if you look at parents, for instance, and they can't really change when their children wake up and how much sleep that they're able to get and the specific sort of schedules that they're able to give themselves. I'm kind of interested to know from your perspective, with that sort of relationship with anxiety and struggling to fall asleep. I know that Andre Agassi said it, one of my favorite quotes, and that is, like, I've been cheered by thousands, booed by thousands, but nothing feels as bad as the booing inside your own head those minutes before you fall asleep. And it's that sort of heightened emotional anxiety before you fall asleep. Like, what can we do to get rid of that, to calm ourselves back down and get ourselves in a position that we can actually optimize sleep when we can't change some of the variables, like, getting to bed at the right time or getting 8 hours of sleep unbroken?
Right. So there's a lot to unpack here, right? So first, I'm going to start with what you mentioned last, 8 hours. I don't think about sleep in terms of hours of sleep. I think about it in terms of sleep cycles of 90 minutes each. So we know that the younger you are, the more sleep you need. So toddlers need a lot of sleep compared to adults. So we're thinking a newborn within the first year of life needs 12 to 16 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period. That's including naps. Teenagers may need 8 to 10 hours. And for my elite athletes, depending on how much training they're doing, the kind of sport they're doing, they may need anywhere between 9, 10 and a half, 12 hours in a 24-hour period. So 5 sleep cycles is 7.5 hours, which is what most adults, in the absence of sleep qualitative issues like sleep apnea, may need. We have busy lives, and the first thing to fall off tends to be sleep, unfortunately. This got really, really impactful, especially with the lockdowns, where people were either working from home or lost their jobs. And then everything was done in the home. All of us don't exactly have mansions, so you tend to work on your bed or work in the bedroom. And all those things, all those associations feed into poor quality sleep because we're creatures of habit. We like patterns in our brains. Our brains have circadian and homeostatic rhythms that need to be synchronized. And so it's a bidirectional kind of thing with anxiety and sleep, to your point. If you're anxious, you're not going to be able to calm your brain down. You're not going to be able to fall asleep properly. But if you're not getting enough sleep, it's going to fuel anxiety. And why does poor sleep fuel anxiety? Many different neurobiological ways. One is that I mentioned earlier, cortisol levels, stress hormone levels are much higher when you are sleep deprived. Inflammation, pain, and all those things can affect your sleep quality. But also when we look at the brain scans at the Amen clinics, we see that the same patterns I see in my MMA fighters and boxers and NFL players are the same brain patterns I see in people with chronic sleep problems. When I see sleep problems, it's not just the number of hours of sleep, it's also the timing of sleep, the regularity, and the quality of sleep. So basically, long-term sleep problems, timing, quantity, quality, affect the brain the same way concussions do, perhaps even worse because of the other whole system impacts. The rational parts of the brain, the frontal lobes, which help us with motivation, drive, energy, driven by dopamine, rational thinking, drop in activity with sleep problems. And the temporal lobes, which control our emotional stability, also drop. Both of those impacts worsen anxiety as well, which will fuel sleep problems because anxiety is danger mode. We're biologically hardwired for survival. And sleeping is the most vulnerable thing we do. They're incompatible. So insomnia driven by anxiety should not be treated with Ambien or Trazodone or clonazepam or benzodiazepines. The underlying anxiety needs to be adequately addressed because it's then going to fuel better sleep, which will reduce the anxiety in a positive feedback loop. How do you do that? First of all, people say, I want to go to bed at the same time every day. Wrong. You have to wake up in the morning at a fixed time every single day and count backwards. That's going to be your number one anchor. No matter how.
Sorry, just
yeah.
Could you double click on why? That's really interesting because I think it's so well known. Oh, go to sleep at the same time is sort of what people think. Why is the morning time more important?
Morning wake up is more important because you can control that. Even if you're really hitting the snooze and the alarm multiple times, you can control that, but you can't exactly tell your brain sleep unless you do self-hypnosis, and you can do that too. Different story. So you can have some semblance of control in your wake up time. Wake up at a fixed time every morning, get some sunlight on your face. It drives your melatonin down, synchronizes your rhythm, strengthens your circadian rhythm for the daytime wakeful period. Counting backwards, I'm an average guy, I'm no elite athlete. I need 7.5 hours of sleep. So if I wake up at 7:30 in the morning, I need to be asleep at 12 a.m., hopefully, which means an hour before that, like 11 p.m., I'm going to have a nice calming winding down routine. It's good as a barrier between your busy day and winding down before bed to use what we call in psychology classical conditioning to train your brain to say, okay, I'm winding down, I'm getting ready for bed. We do this with infants and toddlers and kids as well, right? That's how parents train their infants. One of my closest friends just got a baby boy in February, and he was complaining to me about how terrible the sleep is for him and his wife and his son. And I said, well, it's your fault because you didn't train your baby. I told you what to do before your baby was born, months before. But no, I gave him a lot of crap. But they're doing better. So a winding down period is so important because your brain is not a light bulb. It cannot switch on and off just like that. I call it a daily download, writing down what happened during the day that's on your mind, what you need to be thinking about the next day, your to-do list, your worry list. It can be a warm shower. I always advocate for dimming the lights, make it romantic at home, light some candles instead. And dimming the lights or dark glasses. People talk about light blocking apps on their phone or glasses, blue light blocking glasses, not as effective as we'd like them to be. Also, our wakefulness is affected by all kinds of light, not just blue light. So dimming the lights, winding down routine, a nice warm shower, or even the sauna, which has a whole host of brain health benefits, and then getting to bed when you are sleepy. So that may be 12 a.m. for me if I'm waking up at 7:30 in the morning, or that may be 12:30. That's okay, as long as I'm going to bed when sleepy. So now I'm associating the bed with sleepiness rather than wakefulness or working on my devices in bed or reading in bed. If you want to read something boring out of the bed, because your bedroom is to be your cave. I don't recall any cavemen and women having flat screen TVs or windows or bright paintings. I don't recall that. So if your bedroom is your cave and your refuge, your subconscious mind will feel more protected and safe because, as I said, sleeping is the most vulnerable thing we do. Sleeping in cool temperatures is also very helpful to reduce your core body temperature. So typically 66 to 69 Fahrenheit. I know some ladies feel colder than guys, and so there's always a squabble. I want the covers, I want less covers, I'm sweating through the sheets. So use the Scandinavian method then, right? Have separate bedding for you and your spouse, and then you can have layers as needed. So there are simple strategies to start synchronizing our rhythms from right off the bat. You can start doing that today by setting your alarm for a fixed time, and that includes weekends as well. There's social jet lag where people stay awake late at night on the weekends, wake up late, and then it's disrupted. It's like crossing 2 or 3 time zones each week. But I don't want to say you can't have a social life. No, my athletes have very, very active social lives. I would say that there's ways to strategically nap and sleep extend or bank your sleep so as to keep your rhythms intact while catching up for your total sleep deficit in a 24-hour period.
So getting on to that sort of active, you called it social jet lag, and I've definitely heard and used that term before. There's a lot of symbiotic relationships between what we do in the day impacting how effectively we sleep in the evening. Are there any sort of surprising, from your research, any surprising things that we sort of systematically do during the day that affects our ability to sleep in the evening?
100%. There's a lot of misinformation out there. In fact, on my Instagram channel, Peak Sleep Performance, I've started a whole mini video series called Sleep BS, where people contact me about this and that, my patients, the different things they've read, actually talk about what the facts are and debunk any misconceptions there. So we're doing a lot of things wrong during the day And this is such a great question because what we do during the day is as important, if not more important, than what we do at night. So, one of the most common things is I'm feeling sleepy and tired, I'm going to take a nap. There's a big difference between sleepiness and fatigue. If you've run a marathon, you're fatigued, you're not sleepy. If you're ready to doze off, you're sleepy. So patients come to you all the time and say, I'm tired all the time, I'm sleepy all the time. Well, which is it? Is it lightheadedness or dizziness? So avoiding naps during the day, if you are getting sufficient timings of sleep and sleep quality during the night. It's best to avoid a nap. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Avoid the bedroom and the bed unless it's nighttime, because then you're associating the bed with all the other activities we might want to do. And then when you're lying down in bed, your brain will think, well, what am I supposed to do now? Am I supposed to be on my phone or read my book or work on my tablet? You're going to confuse your brain. So avoid the bedroom unless it's sleep time.
So reading in bed is a no-no as well.
The bed is a no-no. The bed is definitely a no-no. Now, some people have small homes and they have a little armchair in the bedroom. That's fine. Sit on the armchair, but do not read in bed until you're actually feeling sleepy, and then you go to the bed. Also, keep hydrated, because if you're dehydrated, your stress hormone levels will go up. If you are having a lot of sugar and carbs during the day, you're going to have spikes in sugar, then crashes. It's going to cause more ups and downs and disruptions. If you're a worrier, the same areas of the brain that are responsible for working memory, active memory, the temporal lobes, a part of the brain called the hippocampus in there controls our dreams. So we've seen this in rat models, in human beings, rats running around a maze, those areas are active. In their dreams, those areas are active. So if you're worrying during the day, you're going to tend to worry and have anxious or restless dreams at night. So there's a lot of things we're doing during the day that's going to affect it. Stimulants like caffeine, alcohol. Now, some people need stimulants. I discovered this the hard way. Final exams in PT school, I said I need to stay up all night because I had so much to do. I didn't know about the benefits of sleep and memory consolidation, forgive me. And I said, okay, I'm going to have my Coca-Cola. I'm going to have my Mars chocolates over here, my coffee. And I fell asleep. Best, most restful sleep, 8 hours. Woke up in a panic, though, because I was unprepared for the exam. And I wondered why. And later on, I found out many years later through Dr. Amen, who offered me a scan when I started working at the clinics, that I had ADHD. And so the coffee and the Coca-Cola actually calmed my brain down, and I got really good sleep that night. So one size doesn't fit all. People might say avoid caffeine. Don't eat 3 hours before bedtime. Well, what if you have low blood sugar levels in the middle of the night, like a lot of my athletes who are really, really at peak performance? Then I would say have some slow carbs and a high protein meal even an hour before bedtime. If you don't have reflux, it's absolutely fine. There's a ton of misconceptions. Even the lighting in the rooms. Some of my very high profile patients have flown me to their homes and said, well, what do I need to do to change this space? I said, well, take out the bank of flat screen TVs on this wall. And they don't like it very much, obviously. And I said, well, do you want to keep performing at the highest level? Or do you want to retire early? Or do you want to risk injury or be cut from the team? You're basically killing everything you've worked hard to achieve thus far.
That's really interesting.
So I think that there's a lot of simple things that add up during the day that fuel our nighttime sleep disruptions. Even chinks of light coming through the window, you might not think that's much of a problem, or even a night light. It's going to affect your ability to sleep properly. Of course, if you wake up to go pee, it's normal. Most people do. If you have a little night light, that's fine. But if the light is on for a few minutes or more, it's going to kick in different nervous pathways in the brain that trigger longer wakefulness periods. So don't look at your phone when you wake up in the middle of the night unless you're on call and you're the surgeon. No, there's no need to do that. There's no need to work really hard at something and get with your second wind late at night and then switch the lights off and say, okay, it's time for bed. The brain really doesn't work that way. So if you consolidate your wakeful time, get some bright light, and then have good quality sleep, at night, you're going to have good wakefulness during the day. If you need a strategic nap, NASA has shown this with pilots, really, really good outcomes with a 26-minute nap, a strategic nap, that is. They could boost alertness and productivity by 30 and 50%. But what is a strategic nap? Can you nap for an hour and a half? Probably not. No, it's not a good idea. You're going to wake up out of a deeper stage of sleep. You'll feel more exhausted. But a strategic nap could be 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or if you've been sleep deprived, gone out on a weekend night with your friends, you lost out on 3 hours of sleep. So instead of going to sleep at 12 a.m., you went to sleep at 3 in the morning. Keep that wake up time at 7:30 fixed. And then you'll feel terribly sleepy. I know it's brutal.
That is brutal.
But you'll have had around 4.5 hours of sleep. So you won't exactly feel terrible right off the bat, but you will feel terrible around 11 a.m., 12 p.m. Well, that's when you take that strategic nap of 3 hours or 2 sleep cycles to make up for that total deficit in that 24-hour period. And you won't feel like you are going to stay up late at night the following night, because you've had your 7.5 hours, not anything more. You'll be able to sleep properly and synchronize right away. So despite all the things we're doing wrong, there's a lot of things we can correct.
On the 7.5 hours, even the idea of only getting 7.5 hours makes me feel very uneasy. And I'm one of those people who, if I would estimate between 8 and 9 hours. And that's very unscientific estimate. But do you find that different people have different sleep needs? And how do people figure out what their sleep needs actually are in terms of hours in bed?
Yes, that is a phenomenal question. And there's a very simple answer to this. So I always train my patients not to go by their wearables. I'm old-fashioned, I don't use a single wearable. It's really important to get in touch with your body, with your rhythms. If you're waking up refreshed and functioning through the day, you're getting your ideal amount of sleep. Women tend to need more sleep than men. The younger you are, the more sleep you need. The more activity you're engaging in, the more recovery sleep you need. So if you feel you need closer to 9 hours of sleep in order to wake up refreshed, that's your normal. That's okay. The normal range of total sleep in a 24-hour period is supposed to be between 6 and 10 hours. There's a big range there. So if you're getting less than 6 hours of sleep, negative consequences. Getting more than 10 hours of sleep, unless you're compensating for activity and other things, negative consequences according to literature in terms of heart attacks, strokes, dementia, shorter lifespans even. Now, there's 1% of the population who are called short sleepers, who have a genetic basis for getting less sleep and needing less sleep and functioning really well on less sleep. And they've been found to not have any of the negative consequences associated with long-term sleep deprivation in terms of the DNA end gaps, the telomere length, or the testosterone depletion over time with sleep deprivation, or the longevity or the dementia risk with sleep deprivation. They don't suffer from any of those negative consequences. Just 1% of the population.
Just on that, I've got a friend who specifically, she was an architect, and I remember during university, she hardly slept and she functioned fine. And I've always toyed with the idea that, does that mean she's evolutionarily advanced in the sense that she's able to basically get what she needs with less sleep, and there's me needing 9 hours. I'm just I'm still stuck in, I'm less evolutionary advanced, put it that way. Is there some basis for that? I literally am. I need those 9 hours. But I'm interested, and maybe this digs into the question of what is the purpose of sleep? Why do we sleep? And why do we need that amount of sleep? And I know there's still a lot of questions in the literature about this, but from what you've seen and researched and sort of experienced, what's your kind of explanation? And do you think there is an evolutionary sort of adaptability to need less sleep?
First of all, I don't think you're less advanced than anybody else.
Thank you, Shane. Scott.
No comment.
Will be the fifth there. It's our knowledge of sleep has just only recently advanced. So when we think about evolution, we think about millennia. When we think about what's happened in the last several years, It's a progressive understanding, but also a progressive drop in total sleep because of work and other things. Historically, anthropologists have said sleep has been bimodal in human beings. So a few hours in the afternoon, several hours at night, or even nightly chunks. So when the sun went down, they'd go to sleep for a while, and they'd be awake for a few hours, then asleep again. And then that's okay, because think about cavemen and women. Think about fire, tending to the fire, taking turns at caring for the offspring, looking out for dangers. Maybe the hunters would have to go at dawn or dusk to hunt while the others slept, and then the others would sleep while the others prepared the meal. So there's many um, theories about how bimodal sleep came into existence, and now we want to squish all our sleep together just at night. And some studies say people who nap during the day have an increased risk of heart disease and strokes. I think that's because those people who nap are feeling sleepy because of sleep problems. But then strategic naps have also found to reduce by 37% the risk of heart attacks. So whether it's 9 hours or 7.5 hours, how do you know if you're getting quality sleep? Fixed timings. So lock in that wake up time and then see how much sleep you need. How much sleep did you need on vacation the last time you went on vacation? Was it closer to 9 hours or was it closer to 7 hours? So counting backwards, you'll be able to kind of lock in your wake up time, see whether you need closer to 7.5 hours of the 1 hour winding down period or 9 hours of the 1 hour winding period, as long as you're getting good quality sleep. So if you're not feeling refreshed, getting 9 or 10 hours of sleep, that's not normal. It might be a sleep qualitative issue like restless legs, grinding of your teeth, digestive issues, a whole host of issues. It's like sleep apnea that may not be allowing you that quality sleep. And that's when you get an expert opinion to say, well, something else is going on here. It's not normal to wake up unrefreshed.
Can we talk about cognitive behavioral thoughts before bedtime? I know that you've mentioned before the integration of the shadow and other theories as such. Can you sort of give us a little bit of an explanation as to what that means and how it sort of helps our overall ability and optimization of sleep?
So we can talk about the shadow and we can talk about sleep anxiety as well. So there's many reasons why people feel anxious when they're going to sleep. It's one thing for me is we have busy lives. We're always on our phones, even in the elevators, even when commuting to work or home. We're always doing something on social media, listening to podcasts like this, listening to music, always busying our brains. And that's led to an inability to process things that are happening during the day, inability to assimilate the information we're flooding our brains with. So the only time you tend to do that is quiet time with a reduction in external stimulation. Unfortunately, that happens to be around bedtime for most of us. And at that time, the thoughts start flooding to the surface. That's why I said maybe a daily download of writing down things that happened during the day, or journaling, which can be very effective. I've seen that journaling also improves heart rate variability, which tells me that your nervous system is calming down. And it's important to process those things. So the shadow is kind of related, right? So when we think about the shadow, it's a concept by Carl Jung, who said, well, if we're only focusing on what we're aware of, we're not really getting to know who we are. What's our identity? Our identity, our sense of self, is comprised of the shadow, the stuff that we're unaware of, or the part of the iceberg under the surface of the water. Shadow plus persona. Latin persona is mask. So what we're aware of and what we present to the world. The stuff of the iceberg on top of the surface of the water. Those things combined provide your identity. The shadow comprises everything we've suppressed or pushed aside because we didn't want to deal with it or didn't fulfill a need at a certain point in our lives, either a phase of our lives or a role in our lives. So as a kid, I was in a Jesuit boys' school. It was very strict. I'm a brother of two younger sisters. I'm a son. And so there's various roles I had growing up that were incompatible with biological urges. So if you're in a stable monogamous relationship, you will suppress the tendency to interact with other people in a flirtatious or sexual way, right? If you're chosen to be monogamous. So all those tendencies tend to be suppressed and pushed in the shadow. And on a day-to-day level, if a boss upsets you about something, or a colleague did something that upset you, or someone took your parking spot, you're going to have to go and get your groceries, or deal with the next meeting, and you're going to suppress that. But it's going to come up through the shadow at inopportune moments when you want to suppress it, either before bedtime when you're trying to get your downtime, or in your dreams. And so the dreamscape reflects what we experienced during the day, the previous day, what's been at the back of our minds that we haven't fully processed, what we're experiencing in the bedroom environment, like a pet shifting around in bed, and what we're anticipating the next day. So Freud and Jung were right to a certain degree, and that bears evidence in the current studies and the brain waves we see in terms of activity in different brain regions. So anxiety involves feeling stuck, that I have to do stuff the next day, not having processed previous things, but also maybe if you have anxiety dreams or PTSD nightmares, you may not want to sleep, so you might actually force yourself to stay awake. And that is the worst thing you could do, because it's actually going to make your brain feel like it needs to catch up on more dream sleep, which results in more nightmares. Mm-hmm. So calming the brain down through many, many strategies, whether it's physiological sighing, yoga nidra, meditation or prayerful meditation, writing down the 5 whys or the probabilities, are the various forms of meditation or calming strategies, challenging automatic negative thoughts. Some of these cognitive strategies out of the bed, out of the bedroom, an hour before bedtime, are extremely beneficial.
So this might be a little bit of an out-the-box question, because obviously me as an airline pilot, I'm exposed to a slightly different environment to a lot of other people, but I think that maybe new parents might be able to feel me on this one. What can I do as a long-haul airline pilot that is flying through the night, and then I get 3 hours sleep in the bunk on the aircraft that I almost need to take because it's my only opportunity for sleep that night, and then I'm back at my job? Like, is there anything that I can do, anything that I can put into my wind down routine? Because I'm lying there a lot of the time going, I need to sleep. Like, it's 2 a.m, I'm getting up in 3 hours to fly an approach into somewhere with a storm, and it's really, really busy, really, really, lots of stimulants on it. Like, I need this 3 hours sleep. And not even just that, but adding on to that, if we go back to the Why We Sleep book by Matt Walker, is I know that 40 years of doing this job, the neurological damage and the long-term effects of a lack of sleep and a lack of consistency with my sleep, as well as the quality, like, is going to damage me. Like, I'm sort of worried about that as well. So is there anything that I can do to quieten my mind for those 3 hours, even if it's just, a mini routine that I can get myself into and try? What sort of things do I need to be looking at?
Yeah. First of all, I'm not a parent. So, Gigi, if you'd like to talk about some of the strategies you find helpful with your clients, and then I'll definitely dive in and tell you about some strategies to calm your brain down.
Well, what's really interesting is we focus on changing parent behavior, but effectively we focus on changing parent behavior to make that child feel safe. So they are able to choose to sleep. So I think what you said earlier about sleep being the most vulnerable time, that is so spot on. And it's funny because I know that's so true to be the case with children, but I hadn't quite understood how significant it still was for people as adults. So I'm afraid that the only advice I have is, if it's a child that's waking you up, just know that it is a solvable problem. And, by changing certain behavior and helping that child to feel safe and secure, you can actually make sure that you remove that sort of blocker. I think for Scott, for you, in terms of you only got 3 hours sleep and you can't, unless you sort of stop and quit your job, it's a bit of a more difficult one to solve. So I think there's sort of the longer term strategies I think you can take as a parent to actually solve the reason why you only have a 3 hour stint. But for you, I'm going to have to pass back to you, Shane, in terms of any sort of specific micro wind down strategies for kind of those instances that you can't actually change.
Absolutely. So this is something that I've been wanting to work with first responders on, with airline pilots, with all the staff associated with requiring an airline to function effectively, from the ground staff to the air traffic control to the staff on board as well. So you're going to have a schedule that differs. So you're not even a typical shift worker. And shift workers, okay, you're on second shift, or third shift, or first shift. You don't know what it's going to be like, especially with long haul flights. I mean, it's brutal for me as a passenger when I go to India for Christmas every year with my folks. So I can only imagine what you're going through when you're having to be at the top of your game. So it's going to be constantly variable. The WHO has decided that shift work is a probable carcinogen with direct correlations with colon cancer, breast, prostate cancers, and more research is happening as well. And you're right, the long-term consequences are going to be your increased risk of dementia, heart attacks, strokes, shortened life expectancy across the board, and cancers. Now, none of those are desirable, and your testosterone levels will plummet. So what do we do about it? You can't exactly quit your job. There are things you can do about it. So, as I said, if you know, now, of course, it's hard to talk about an individual calculation because I'd need to know your natural circadian rhythm, your total sleep need in a 24-hour period, your travel times, the time in your destination, the time of origin. It's calculation I'll keep aside. But general principles involve, if you know your total sleep time in a 24-hour period, you say you need 7.5 hours of sleep, and you're trying to sleep in that tiny space over there, trying to sleep is the worst thing you could do because trying wakes your brain up. So that's exactly what you're doing wrong right off the bat, trying to sleep. It's about letting go. So Viktor Frankl, in his book Man's Search for Meaning, spoke about this. He said paradoxical intent. So social anxiety, hyperhidrosis, sweating through your palms. He told this guy to have a little experiment before a party and see how much sweat he could generate and try and break his record. So I do this with my athletes. I say, you're having horrible sleep? Great. Have fun with it. Ask yourself, instead of saying, oh no, is it going to be terrible not to sleep, which fuels anxiety, instead ask yourself, I'm excited to see how little sleep I can survive on tonight. Right? That's going to completely remove that whole anxiety component that drives up your stress hormone levels. So when you're going to that little space, that crawl space to try and get your 3 hours, ask yourself this question. I wonder if I'm going to, look, the fact is, you're still alive, there have been no crashes, you've performed well despite inadequate sleep or suboptimal sleep. So it's not the end of the world to begin with. The second thing is, calming strategies that are evidence-based involve synchronizing, so reducing the burden of your sympathetic nervous system, the fight and flight, and improving the activity of the rest and relax, the parasympathetic. Physiological sighing is a very, very helpful strategy. They're under the umbrella of terms called non-sleep deep rest strategies. I mentioned yoga nidra. Physiological sighing basically involves inhaling and then inhaling even more as much as you can, and then slowly breathing out as long as possible. If you do that for 5 minutes and take your heart rate, you'll see your heart rate has already dropped. Progressive relaxation techniques, telling yourself, okay, just feeling the weight of from the head to the toes to the head, feeling the weight of my head on the pillow, feel how heavy it is, feel like I'm floating, then relaxing the muscles in my neck and shoulders. There's guided progressive relaxations on YouTube as well. If you just follow those things, being in the moment, not worrying about when you're going to fall asleep, your brain will be relaxed. You're going to set an alarm for 3 hours anyway, right? So it's not like you're going to sleep through the alarm. Your brain will be relaxed, and whether you are falling asleep or not is not your concern, because you're recharging your brain through quality non-sleep deep rest anyway. Now, because you are going on long-haul flights and you're a pilot, I think it's really important that you never sleep on your back unless you have to for some orthopedic or pain reason. Sleeping on your side, especially your left side, this applies to anybody even, is very helpful, because in your left-sided position, your drainage channels that open up in deep sleep, the glymphatic system that flush out toxins that build up, are open in your deep sleep only, so you need that sleep quality. But they're also more open, more patent, if you will, in your side sleeping position. Also in your side sleeping position, your spine is more aligned. You're going to be more or less in the fetal position, which calms your brain down. And it's preferably on your non-dominant side as well, because if you're on your non-dominant side and your dominant side is above you, your subconscious mind thinks you're safer, because if someone comes at you with a baseball bat, you could defend yourself. So for those reasons, it's really, really important to try and sleep on your non-dominant side or either side. And of course, sleep apnea is much worse on your back because of the way the airway is constructed. It's more floppy. The tongue falls back if you're on your back. Less severe on your side. Using a weighted eye mask, 10, $15 on Amazon. Earplugs to rule out additional sensation, because even minor sensory inputs will fragment your sleep. So you'll have less restorative, deep and dream sleep and more fragmented or more superficial sleep. So if you do those things, Scott, and let me know, text me anytime on WhatsApp or whatever, and let me know how you're sleeping with those strategies, and then we can tweak it. Remember, the airplane cabins are as dry as the Sahara Desert. So you need to be hydrated at all times, especially on airplanes, because otherwise your brain is going to go into danger mode, your stress hormone levels will be released. So these are important principles for you especially.
Yeah, I love that answer. Thank you so much. And I think there's a lot that we can discuss after this, actually, because I've done quite a lot of studies with other groups about their exposure to life. And I guess it's a metaphor for what we're all going through, but just an extreme version, right, of one or two bits of it. So can't wait to try some of those out. Thanks for that, Shane.
You're welcome.
And Shane, maybe just following on and sort of last question before I hand over to Scott for some rapid fire questions. What can parents take from this in terms of what are the things that they can be proactively teaching their children now? So let's put aside any sleep issues that sort of a 0 to 6-year-old might have. Let's put aside any potential insomnia or sort of medically diagnosed sleep problems. What are the strategies that you've kind of suggested that would really be able to help a child from a young age to kind of get ahead of the curve?
Yes, Gigi, it depends on what age the child is. Are we talking about infants or toddlers, or kids who can understand and communicate with us?
I think let's start with at the sort of age of communication, but as sort of upstream. I always like to try and look at how upstream can we go, because it typically is just the effect is the more upstream you are.
Yeah. So when it comes to infants, newborns, we know that they need sleep most of the time. So their sleep is going to be all over the place. What I would say is that avoid sleeping in the same bed with your kid. They need a crib. There needs to be no stimulation in the crib, no toys, no playthings, no bottles in the crib. Maybe a pacifier is fine, but no stimulation. Buy a good white noise machine that's usually sold to adults. That's going to have consistency in terms of external stimulation for the infant. So white noise machine, blackout room, a crib, non-stimulating environment. Swaddling the baby appropriately is really important for them to be feeling safe and secure. The temperature in the room needs to be between 68 and 72 Fahrenheit. And then have a fixed routine going into the nighttime sleep. So 3 hours should be between supper and dinner time feedings. Nap times can be 2 naps in the course of a day for the toddlers and beyond. Not more than 2 hours each nap. And then, of course, a winding down routine for the infant could involve a nice bath, diaper, clothes and swaddle the kid, feed them, burp them, white noise machine, maybe rock them for a little bit, place them in the crib, no bottle, close the door with the lights off. So that's generally the protocol you're going to train your kid on. The older they are, if they are within the age of reason, can communicate effectively. If they're 3 to 5 years old, they may need 10 to 13 hours of sleep, including naps in a 24-hour period. And then that winding down routine is going to be needed, but also that fixed sleep time, wakeful time, needs to be there. So counting backwards, if they need 10 to 13 hours of sleep, including naps, shoot for 10 hours, fixed wake-up time. But a winding down routine could involve also a bedtime story or just that alone precious time with your kid. You're talking about your day or talking about interesting things. Nothing too stimulating or exciting. But maybe a nice bedtime story or lullabies or singing to calm them down and say, well, it's time for bed. Kids may put up a fuss. No, read me another story. Well, it's past your bedtime. Would you like to not have a story the next day? Or would you like to go to sleep now? So there's supposed to be some sort of a reward and gentle punishment system involved there as well that the kid is aware of. Now, if they're screaming, yelling, trying to get out of bed, knocking on the door, if they can get out of the crib on their own, always have the doorknob much higher and have it accessible to you from the outside. So you might have to switch the doorknobs out later on. And have a child-safe environment, nothing that they could swallow, consume that goes without saying. They're knocking, bang on the door, don't encourage the behavior, because as we know, if you're encouraging that behavior and giving them attention through inappropriate stimuli, then they're going to continue doing the same things because they realize that it worked. So as much as it may hurt you, avoid giving in or indulging their cries and their screams and their yells, unless there's, of course, a situation that you need to monitor, like blood sugar levels during the night if they have diabetes. Now, those are the major strategies. Going further, if there are problems that you're identifying, they're snoring, if they're stopping breathing during the night, if the kid is still sleepy during the day, those things are not normal. That's when you might want to see a pediatrician or a sleep specialist for kids. We call it the BEARS screening tool for assessment of sleep. So bedtime problems, excessive daytime sleepiness is the E. A is for awakenings during the night, so multiple awakenings during the night. Typically, infants may need 2 or 3 wakeful periods for feeding, but you could actually prompt it by waking the baby up and feeding them rather than going on their schedule to create some structure and routines and anchors for their wakeful times and sleep times. So those things are really important at a very basic level to regulate your child's sleep. And of course,
Awesome.
The older they are, you might also talk to them about how sleep problems can drop their GPA, how their memory can be affected by over 40%, how their athletic performance might be affected negatively. So then we can start providing education to our kid aligned with their goals, whether it's academics or sports or general health and well-being, which is factual, but will be further incentives to helping them improve their sleep. And parents, if you're giving them screens that they're allowed to use before bedtime, the problem is you, not the child.
Love it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think screen time is probably such a big one. I think that's probably the number one takeaway is if your child's kind of watching screen time right up until the time they go to bed, it's the not just what happens on that night, but the habitual kind of training that you're doing. And I would imagine that has sort of longer term consequences.
Definitely.
But Shane, before we go, we've got some quick fire questions for you. And this is for my side of the podcast. But the first one is one piece of advice you would tell your younger self before starting out.
Prioritize sleep, and I'd probably have a much easier time through med school.
The second one is one mantra or belief that has enabled your high performance life.
One of my mentors growing up through undergrad and med school, he took me under his wing. I don't know why. And he said, he's Muslim. He said, in the Quran, it says, God says, if you heal one man, you heal all of mankind. And so when I was worrying about what I should do, whether I should continue in the medical field or do an MBA in healthcare or whatever, he said, stick to what you know best, stick to healing, and you'd be blessed with opportunities. And I'm so grateful I followed that advice.
I love that. And I think that can be applied to everybody in terms of service, right? You know, if you can serve one man, then you serve mankind in a way.
And that's exactly what you guys are doing as well. Even podcasts, providing awareness, education, changing the conversation and the paradigm. We're healing.
Love it. Third question, one simple ingredient or habit that has allowed you to stay consistent. I guess, like, let's not go for sleep, but have you got anything else? Because I know sleep is probably the obvious answer, right?
I always think about the processes rather than the outcomes. I want to get to point Z or Z, but how do I start with the simple things? It's very easy to say I want a big picture thing that's intangible, but what are the tangibles? What's the process? Put one foot in front of the other. If it's an uncertainty that you're experiencing in life, whatever it is, whether it's a relationship or whether it's work, or whether it's a career trajectory, or health, or getting back on track after not working out for a few months, start with the small steps. Just get to the gym and just stand there staring at the weights. You'll guilt yourself into actually lifting some.
I love that answer. That's a great one. And one final question: what's your go-to tune or artist? I'm going to say for getting to sleep, for winding down. Do you have a go-to tune or a go-to artist that you put on?
I don't, because I sleep really well.
Well, let's talk about for teeing you up for a good day then.
Yeah, so I like "Run This Down" by Jay-Z and Rihanna to bump me up for the day, only because when I was studying for the US licensing exams, not knowing whether I'd get into residency or not, because it's so competitive to do specialization. I don't know, but my parents were so kind. They rented out an apartment near where we lived, so I wouldn't have any distractions. I could just study all day and night, and I'd come back home at 10:30 p.m. for a late dinner at home before I'd go to sleep, and then back the next day. And walking back home every night, I'd listen to the "Run This Down," thinking about what am I working toward, what's within my control. And so that's been my go-to before important meetings, before I meet with teams and athletes. "Run This Down" is my tune.
I love it. Well, it's going on the Performance Hackers podcast. So thank you so much. And thank you so much for all of the different, I've learned so much from listening to you today that I've been obsessed with sleep for probably 7 or 8 years, in terms of from something that's impacted me on such a personal level in terms of the exposure that I have. And some of the things that you've talked to us about today is the first time I'm hearing it. So thank you so much for those insights today. I think I'm going to be bugging you a lot in the future.
Oh, please do. And let me know if you'd like me to send you a copy of my book, because it's tailored toward optimization for high functioning people. So it's been a pleasure speaking with you both. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Shane. Super fascinating.
Take care, Shane.